There was a time when Seddon Atkinson ruled the road like a trusted old mate, dependable, no nonsense, and always up for a shift. It wasn't the flashiest badge in the yard, and it didn't have the sleek Scandinavian curves of a Scania or the cool, quiet hum of a modern Volvo, but for decades, if you needed a proper British-built truck to get a heavy load from Manchester to Glasgow in the dead of winter, you called in a Seddon Atkinson, and it would show up. Rain, sleet, uphill, crosswind, didn't matter. These trucks weren't about ego, they were about getting on with it, and for a while they were everywhere. Born from two separate firms, Seddon Diesel Vehicles of Lancashire and Atkinson Vehicles of Preston, the two brands merged in the 1970s to create one of Britain's last truly independent heavy-duty truck manufacturers. Seddon had the guts, Atkinson had the heritage. Together they formed a company that punched well above its weight. British-built, British-run, and filled with working-class pride from the factory floor to the far end of the motorway. The cab of a Seddon Atkinson wasn't posh, not even close. It was boxy, practical, and built for the bloke who lived half his life on the road. No heated seats, no fancy air ride suspension. Just a basic, honest space with everything a driver needed and not much else. And that was fine, because the men behind the wheel weren't asking for luxury. They just wanted a truck that wouldn't leave them stranded on the A1 when the gearbox decided to throw in the towel. And that's what they got. The trucks were simple, rugged, and forgiving. You could hear the engine humming along like it was telling you, "Don't worry mate, we've got this." But like many great British brands, success didn't last forever. The cracks started to show when foreign manufacturers began circling the market. In came DAF with its efficiency, Mercedes with its precision, and Volvo with its luxury. Seddon Atkinson suddenly felt old, outclassed. The big firms had money, tech, and marketing. Seddon had history, but that only got you so far. Then came the buyouts. First, International Harvester got involved, which was a bit of a shock to the system. Then it got passed on again, and eventually, by the mid-80s, Seddon Atkinson was swallowed up by Iveco, the Italian truck-making behemoth. And that, in hindsight, was the moment the writing appeared on the wall. Because what Iveco wanted wasn't the brand, it was the market access. They didn't want to save Seddon Atkinson, they wanted to use it. And so, slowly but surely, the identity started fading. The badge stayed, the name lived on. But what was underneath began to shift. More and more, Seddon Atkinsons became rebadged Avoidable, the same trucks underneath, just wearing a familiar face for the British market. And drivers noticed. You can slap a Seddon badge on the grille all you want, but when the cab's built in Italy and the parts don't fit quite the same, it doesn't feel like home anymore. Mechanics started grumbling, fleets moved on, and by the mid-90s, the brand had all but lost its soul. Still, it limped along. There were a few modern efforts. The Stratos, for instance, had potential. But it was like trying to paint over a crumbling wall. The damage was already done. Haulage firms wanted fuel economy, comfort, parts availability. And while the Seddon name still had a bit of weight with the old guard, it wasn't enough to win contracts. The brand that once represented everything British about trucking had become little more than a sticker on the front of an Italian chassis. By the early 2000s, the end was near. Production had slowed to a crawl. The factories that once roared with welding torches and shouting foremen were silent. And in 2005, Iveco pulled the plug. No big announcement, no grand farewell, just like that, gone. One of Britain's last remaining lorry legends, erased. And yet, just like Foden, ERF, and the rest of Britain's lost haulage giants, Seddon Atkinson didn't truly die. It just shifted. Today, you'll still spot the odd 401 or Strato clinging to life on a remote B road or pulling duty on a farm somewhere. Not because they're still commercially viable, but because some people just can't let go. They remember what it felt like to drive one, to trust one, to be part of a fleet where every driver knew his truck by name and had the busted knuckles to prove it. That's the funny thing about old British trucks. They may not have aged as well as their continental cousins. They may not be as efficient or aerodynamic, but they've got stories under every scratch and dent. They were workhorses in the truest sense. And Seddon Atkinson, it was one of the hardest working of them all. There's something quietly noble about a lorry brand that went down swinging. And that's exactly what happened to Seddon Atkinson. Even after being gutted, badge swapped, and forgotten by the big suits, the name didn't just vanish into thin air. It lingered, like oil on concrete, like diesel in the air after a cold start. And for the drivers who spent their best years in the cab of a 401 or a Strato, it never really left at all. See, there's a difference between a truck that was good and a truck that was yours. Seddon Atkinsons weren't perfect. They rattled, they rusted, some of them leaked like a sieve in winter. But they were yours. You learned its quirks. You kicked the same tire every morning before your run. You knew exactly how far to push it up Shap before she'd drop a gear and start to grumble. That's the kind of connection you don't get with modern machinery. The new trucks might be quiet, efficient, and clean, but they don't talk to you like the old girls did. Even now, scattered across scrapyards and tucked away in sheds behind farms, a few Seddon Atkinsons cling to life. Enthusiasts scour auction sites for parts, hoping to keep just one more on the road for another year. You'll spot one at a vintage rally, sandwiched between a Scammell and a Bedford, polished up like a relic from another world. And when the driver cracks open the door and climbs down, he'll tell you the same thing. She's not just a showpiece, she earned her miles. That sort of loyalty doesn't die when production stops. It carries on, in stories, in scars, in stubby gear sticks, and worn-out logbooks. What makes Seddon Atkinson's fall sting even more is how avoidable it was. This wasn't a brand that ran out of ideas, it was a brand that got ignored, underfunded, mismanaged. You can trace its decline not through engineering faults, but through boardroom decisions. The shift to badge engineering stripped away what made them special. The suits thought no one would notice, but of course the drivers noticed. They always do. The blokes who sleep in their cabs, wrench on the axle in the rain, and finish a 12-hour shift with frozen fingers. They notice everything. When Iveco finally pulled the plug in 2005, there wasn't even a proper send-off. No tribute, no factory farewell, just silence. And yet, the end wasn't entirely bleak. In a strange way, that silence sparked something. Nostalgia, respect, maybe even a bit of defiance. Because across the country, people started remembering that old Seddon that pulled concrete out of a quarry for 15 years straight, that fleet of municipal tippers that never quit, that cab that smelled like a mix of bacon butties, wet coats, and diesel, but always felt like home. And it's not just about the trucks, it's about what they represented. Working class grit, British steel, a time when haulage wasn't ruled by efficiency metrics and satellite tracking. When you signed up for a run, you earned it, mile after mile, breakdowns and all. Seddon Atkinson was part of that era, built by British hands, driven by British hearts. It was more than just a logo. It was a link in the chain that kept Britain moving. Today, you'll find the name only in conversation, maybe on an old mud flap in a mate's shed, maybe on the side of a rusted cab tucked behind a hedge, but it still sparks something, not just recognition, but respect. You can almost hear the growl of an old Cummins engine as it fires up. You can feel the shake in the cab as it idles, waiting for the brake check. These weren't just trucks, they were characters, each one with its own story, its own attitude, its own history, written in grease and grit. And maybe that's the legacy of Seddon Atkinson, a lorry that gave everything it had, right up until the last bolt stopped turning. And for those who remember, that's more than enough. So next time you hear a throaty roar off a back lane, or spot a weathered badge on a scrap truck with just a bit of life left in it, tip your cap. That's not just scrap, that's a chapter of British haulage history still writing its final lines, one last mile at a time.